Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our transformation webinar, of which I am delighted today to be joined by Michael Esau and Paul Chambers, and we're going to be focusing on SAP and success factors. So if you're not interested in SAP and success factors, now's the time to pop off, or maybe you will gain an interest by listening to these two experts in the area. Now, Michael, you work for SAP and you're Global HR Value Advisory Lead. What does that mean?
Good question. Yeah, no, and thanks for having me, Tom. Very simply, I joined almost 10 years ago, having been a practitioner. My role is to assist customers who are embarking on change. And that can range from helping them with strategy, the case for change. It could be helping them on the investment case. But in essence, it's working through what we call the sort of the key considerations, if you like, Tom, that underpin a change.
So I had a phone problem there, which is now off. Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. That's really great. So you really understand SAP back to front, success factors, and what the impact it can have on HR.
I hope I will reflect it well, Tom.
Just the man to join us. Paul Chambers is also joining us, and you are an experienced program director in the SAP world for many years, I believe, Paul. But if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, correct. Thanks, Tom, and hi everyone. So Paul Chambers, I'm leading the SAP and Success Factors practice at Varan Performance, and as Tom mentioned, I've done SAP my whole professional career, specifically focusing on human capital management, HR, since the acquisition of Success Factors. So been involved in multiple implementations of Success Factors, some good, some bad, I'll admit. But yeah, so I hopefully I've got enough experience that I can share with you and help give you some insight if you're either on the journey or about to take the journey. Hopefully I can provide you some experience.
Brilliant. So my name's Tom Holmes. I'm founding director of Varan Performance. We're leading digital transformation organizations who deal with back office digital transformation into cloud, as I guess many of you, I hope, know already. And what I'm trying to do is a series with experts from each of the technology companies to explain how to get the best out of their software and what the hints and tips and tricks from real experienced practitioners are. So I'm delighted to be joined by these guys today, and I'm delighted to be joined by all of you. Please ask questions as we go through, post them in the Q&A box on Zoom, and I will pose those to our panelists as we go through today. But to kick off, I'd like to ask you, Michael, why companies are choosing SAP at the moment in the HR side.
So I think it's a big question, right? There's a number of reasons, I think, Tom, why people are choosing. So let's start with the first and foremost. You have to look at SAP in its entirety, right? You can't look at it in isolation. So many customers today are using SAP technology, perhaps for their ERP, for finance, for procurement, etc. So you have to take into account the scenarios where data and a consistent data model is a priority. So that broader enterprise argument can't be ignored. I think there are some real fundamental points. So that's number one. I think the second one is that we continue to grow the breadth of our capability. So if you're looking for transactional excellence, if you're looking at the whole employee life cycle, I think the breadth and depth of our capability is massively appealing for customers that are looking for that one unified experience. And then I think the third, if I can, Tom, is the unique strategy of SAP. I think when you're making a change today, you've got to look 3, 5, 7 years in advance to say, who is going to support us not only today, but tomorrow, and help us to meet the challenges we're undoubtedly going to face. So having an organization with a clear innovation strategy, and SAP does. So we have innovation within SAP, right? So the platform and all of that work, innovation within success factors, but then the innovation around the edges. There's no monopoly on innovation, Tom, and I think people are responding really well to the fact that we have a very clear innovation strategy that's agile. And the last one I will just add in is global. I think organizations today understand the importance of globalization and having localized content. And I think we deliver that crucially as a service out the box. That matters a lot. And I'm sure we'll come back to that.
So yes, and to summarize that, what you're describing really is a single, one unified experience.
Yes.
Expressed in data, in the way the technology works globally, in the way it allows people to grow and is growing its capability all the time. So that kind of single unified experience, you're thinking is the key reason why SAP is chosen by its customers. What do you think, Paul? What are the reasons? What are you seeing as to why people are choosing SAP?
Well, I mean, I agree with Michael, but I think there's three other points that we can really zero in on. I think the first one is the modular approach to SuccessFactors allows organizations to implement the technology based on what is going to add the most value and provide the most benefit. So therefore, if you want to start with talent first, great. If you want to put core HR, great, etc. Or you could do the whole shooting match all in one go if you dare. The other point is as well, so the second point is that the SuccessFactors has always had an eye on leading practice within the market and has looked to incorporate that into the product. So for instance, you have continuous performance management. So when that was really kicking off back in sort of 2015, 16, with the big debates around ratings, no ratings, conversation, etc. SAP was dropping that into the product and is now stable, very much incorporated, embedded, and it's sort of leading practice. And you can see that across the whole suite, even in recruiting with bias, technology, etc. And then lastly, also they're looking at something that they've really kind of zeroed in on probably in the last 2 years, is to really look at the interface in terms of the conversational interface, and also the way that SuccessFactors is consumed across multiple devices. There was a time when if you went onto your laptop or your PC or whatever, you'd get one screen, whereas if you looked on your mobile, you get another. And what they're moving towards now is that cohesive interface across, doesn't matter what device you're on. So I think, they're always progressing, always looking, always moving in the right direction. I think that is key for the decision in terms of purchasing and implementing SuccessFactors.
Right, that's really interesting, because actually you're saying things which are complementary but different from each other. So what you're saying, Michael, is that single unified experience of in all aspects which are driving the decision point towards the SAP, and then Paul, you're saying it's about the innovation, which is really exciting your customers and clients, and then how SAP are innovating all the time. I think that's very interesting. That combination of unified experience and innovation is pretty tricky to balance. So I guess, Paul, here's the $22 question, because they've got another thing which we all know from SAP, etc., that sometimes is a bit tricky to make the programs succeed in the way you want them to do. So what and how do we make SuccessFactors programs really successful? How do we do that?
Well, I think in the first instance, just to call out that typically the technology is not really the issue that is going to stop or hinder success. I think the technology itself, because it's public SaaS or software as a service, because it's leading practice processes, because it's all there in terms of configuration and very limited in the way that you can customize, the technology is not what's standing in your way. I think in terms of successful implementation of SuccessFactors, before you even touch technology, is start to look at, and I think, Michael, you'd be in violent agreement, you've got to really start to look at what are the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve, end of story. So I think if you have those, then it just starts to, proliferate from there in terms of looking at getting the message right to the organization, roles and responsibilities, etc. But I think in essence, if there's one thing I could give people from this session, is the technology is not what's going to stop you from being successful.
Now, can you explain that, unpack that a little bit? Because there's a lot of talk about not customizing SAP, not customizing SuccessFactors. Now we're moving to the cloud. But How does that work? What's the difference? So we look at our business outcomes. In the past, what we do is go, okay, well then I need to modify all the technology so that it can address that particular outcome or something like that. But how do you avoid that occurring, and why should you avoid that occurring in the cloud world? I'm not sure which one of you guys I'm putting that question to, but
I'll take a stab if I can, Paul, and then I'll hand
for
to
it,
you.
Michael.
And building on what you were just saying there, Paul. So, you know, Tom, SuccessFactors is 20 years in the cloud, right? That's its origination. It's 20 years, you know.
yeah.
And the acquisition was what, 9 years ago, or I think it's about 9 years ago. It was always a game changer because the direction of where we're heading in terms of execution is changing, right? Technology's built. It's built, right? You're not going into a room with brown paper and working out your process maps. You're not looking back, you're looking forward. And so the question now is that as we understand more about what are these sort of leading practices and what are some of these better processes, we're moving more to adopt rather than adapt. And I think this is a really crucial point. It's almost commoditization, Tom, in some respects. You know, we're really privileged. We've got over 7,400 customers today, and that's a lot of people using it. So it's commoditized. So what we know is, well, is your organization different to this organization? Is there a reason why you can't adopt this process? And what we're finding more and more is customers are going, no, there's no reason why we can't. So they're moving to that direction. And that's crucial because it means that your focus then is on, well, what are we trying to achieve, right? What actually fundamentally needs to be different? Which process outcome? And I think to Paul's point, this flexibility we have in the proposition then becomes crucial. So if XYZ process is what we really are concerned about, these are 3 KPIs that we really need to make an impact on. I think these are the 3 pieces of capability or 4 pieces of capability that are really going to help us address that. So you start where you're going to make the biggest impact on your business. And I think that's crucial.
Now, I'm starting to understand that, Mike. So what we're saying is you look at all the processes and their areas, you identify which are special and important to your outcomes, as you were describing, Paul, focus on those and getting those right, whilst accepting the standardization and adopting everywhere else, because after all, they're doing stuff which everyone else does or pretty near. But I like that because then I'm assuming that you can put more focus, because we've all got limited resources, right? You can put more focus on those areas which matter because you've narrowed it right down, accepting that the solution is going to work across the rest.
Yeah. Okay, and sorry, Michael, can I just quickly jump in just to progress that part a little bit as well, and just to understand that processes perfect, and that is the key intersect from system, process, people. But I think what's key now with cloud products, especially in SuccessFactors, is the key differentiator or the key advantage you're going to get is to look at how the practice part. And the organization I work with at the moment, there is a big focus on practice, which means the ways that we work. So that means how do we do these processes? And they may vary in terms of the practice may vary based on region, based on culture, etc. But the bedrock is that process plus the system. That's what I mean. That is your foundation. Getting the advantage is how you do it.
So where there are variations, rather than expressing those in the process, etc., you're expressing them in this other tier, which is the practice tier. So then the practice can differentiate according to your business need, country to country, but the process, the underlying process held within SAP and SuccessFactors stays the same. Is that what you're describing, Paul?
Yeah, correct. And just before I let Michael go, so I can see he's itching to get going. The piece there as well is that when you look at practice expands also beyond the system. It actually for you to be able to make sure you get the maximum value, you have to look at things that happen off system, on system, and then the different systems. So it's encapsulating that whole view is where you actually get the main benefit, right? But the fundamental foundation is definitely that success factors, and then the processes that underpin it.
Really, I think that's fascinating. Do you want to say anything to that, Michael?
Yeah, no, I love it, Paul. Honestly, I love it. Right, and we had Success Connect, our conference, our virtual conference last week, and one of our customers from Zurich spoke very clearly, Paul, to that point. It's not about the technology; it's the culture we're creating, and it's the mindset that we're creating. Because Tom, what's crucial is we're in a changing context, right? Consumerization changed the fabric of how we live our lives fundamentally about 5 or 6 years ago. And now so that's having a major bearing on our behavior, our preferences, the way we look at the world of work, how we want to get work done, when we want to be available. And that's what you have to really focus on from a practice perspective, is culturally, philosophically, how will we work? Then you can then say, what do we need to dramatically enhance how we execute that work? Then you go and look at the technology, and where technology is caught up, as you said, Tom, we don't have a plethora of resources. We don't have 2 years anymore to go away and build something. We've got to move at pace. Can I adopt these processes to drive an enhanced execution to drive this outcome? Yes, I can.
Right.
Great, I can. Wonderful.
So rather than an older style implementation where we would take the client, we'd look at the processes, we'd study the processes in great detail and try and design for SAP and SuccessFactors what their processes should look like. Where you're saying lift that up, focus on the business outcomes, the practices which are required to do that, and use the standard processes and embedded processes, which are fairly standard from one organization, to underpin that rather than try and drive it with that. I like that a lot. That's a great story. I often think there's been a lot of effort in the last 20 years on trying to redesign the processes in the technology, when actually I'm loving the idea of being able to free ourselves from that and think about the practice instead. I guess it's not 100%, but even if it's 80%, that means you've got all your focus on the 20%, which matters. Yeah.
Correct, Tom. Absolutely. And I think there are some real challenges that we've got to fix. Let's get this, make no bones. And Tom, there will be a certain time where there's some adapt needed. As you said, it won't be completely adopt. There may be some, and you can't get away from local variations. Some of them may be legally, right? And we'll take care of that, by the way. But as Paul was absolutely saying, some of it may be in the practice, right?
Yeah.
There are cultural local variations, and that's cool, right? And we have to, you embrace that. But that comes within how you drive the change. That's how you articulate. The bit for me, Tom, is, and it's bugged me a little bit for a number of years, is, people start with the technology and then work out what they're going to do with it. And that's tail wagging the dog. Let's be perfectly honest. And it's flipping it round. The technology is amazing. But as I always say, it's impossible to change without the requisite capability. But just because you have it, it doesn't mean you will change. And this is where the mindset shift, I think, is really kicking in, is that instead of saying, I need a solution, but what benefits will it give me? It's now, well, what actually am I trying to change here? And what capability do I need to underpin that and really dramatically change the execution? And I think that's the flip.
You guys together and separately are telling me that the trick is being able to adopt rather than to adapt. One question we've got from the team who's joined us is given all of that, do you think that customers start early enough thinking about how to, and in that journey, how to do that adopt rather than adapt? And, how early do they need to start in that thought process? And how do you promote that thought process? And I'll start with you, Michael, on how early do you need to start with it, and then move to you, Paul, on how you promote that approach. So Michael, how early do you need to start on that?
Yeah, I never underestimate, and I always say to people, do your thinking, right? Do your thinking as early as possible. Craft and articulate what the change is. So get clear on that first of all, right? What needs to be different? The secondary part then, I think, is really getting with your process owners and really getting that alignment on, is adopt a feasible option, yay or nay, and do it early. Don't do it later down.
Michael, process owners or practice owners?
Both, because don't forget, Tom, you know, if you look at process owners, processes still drive outcomes. So there needs to be a behavior in the process. So you can't exclude, they're critical, they're crucial. And we're not saying for 1 second that processes aren't important. What we're trying to say here is there a way in which we can really improve and drive speed in our execution? And is adopting leading practices and processes an option? But my argument is always, do it early. Don't wait until you get to the design phase, and then all of a sudden there's decision by committee and people saying, yeah, but I want the process to be this way, or I want the process. You've almost got to get it part of your early governance that says, we're going to go with an adopt strategy rather than an adapt, but we may have some tweaks.
I've heard this approach used in other industries. I've heard about architects who design what a building's going to look like overall before getting into the detail of what each little detail looks like. Right, Michael? You're describing the same thing.
Yeah, it's a similar principle.
So, Paul, this is a big change for many of our customers and clients who are working with SuccessFactors, this idea of adopting, adapting, avoiding modification and change. How do you promote that right way of thinking towards practice rather than process change? So how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, and if I marry that up with the question that you asked, Michael, in terms of, you know, how early should all this start? I mean, absolutely, you should start way before you even create your first instance of SuccessFactors and actually start configuring. And, you know, I think the answer, which is a typical consultant answer, it all depends on the organization. Some organizations, what I mean by that is some organizations have a great HRLT governance and a communication meetings and setup, and the dialogue is freely flowing, etc. There'll still be differences. Each individual challenges each other, but as long as you have that governance and that dialogue and the way to communicate open, then that's great. Some don't. And that means it's going to take you a little bit longer. So you need to, create that open environment where HR leaders who may have a vested interest in their own country, in their own region, in their own businesses, need to start shifting their minds away from just a local thinking into global thinking. So I think, there's a spectrum, right? But I mean, if you're in the kind of the latter, then you need to start a lot earlier. Either that, or it kind of just walks on into the implementation, which is problematic. But I mean, we've all kind of been there, and we know what happens. But I mean, you can manage it, right? But I mean, the earlier the better. You give you the best outcome. So I think having that environment where all the HR leaders are thinking global, all HR leaders have an open forum, an open dialogue that they can communicate their concerns. And having that conversation starts to get them to buy in, to support and become your advocates effectively, and ambassadors for the project. I think that is absolutely key before you even step foot through the door of talking technology, etc. I mean, you can set up design guidelines. This is what we plan to do, and get them to agree. But I mean, on one of the organization I'm working at the moment, we kicked off with our commitments. What are we signing up to? 5 simple statements that talk through things that we can reference back to at some point in time if we start to lose our way. So I think that's key, getting that environment set up to have an open, honest conversation, which may not have been there before, but it may have.
You're absolutely right. You did start with a bit of consultant's answer there. The word governance and all that stuff, it's really only consultants who do these kind of big programs who talk about the importance of governance. And yet they all talk about it. And when it's not there, it's a nightmare. But I think our language maybe in articulating that governance and what that actually means in real life needs to improve, because it's a tough one to get across. We say it's the most important thing, and many people go, well, I've already got that, or that's easy, we've got those kind of things in place. But actually, there's a gap between what we're saying and what that response is, which we need to think about, I think.
And
But
Tom,
I love the.
and Tom,
Yes,
can I just build? Can I just build on it with a quick example, actually, because I think
yeah, yes, please.
it's illustrating it. So my colleague Simon Humphries, he talks with customers about governance all the time, but he makes a very, very good point. So if, for example, somebody says we want one template, do it one way, one process across multiple countries, great. But if somebody says, but I want to do it differently, I want every country to have a different process, you can also do that. And the point he always makes is just make a decision. If the decision is one template, then it's one template. If the decision is different processes, there's different. But what you then have to then say is, does that influence the outcome?
Right. So that's the purpose of the governance. So yeah, you can do it 100 different ways, but that has an impact on the outcomes you are seeking.
Correct.
The governance is not protecting the solution, it's protecting those outcomes.
It is, and the decisions that you take, because this is the beauty of cloud, the beauty of SaaS. You can do it in multiple different ways, right? That's got nothing to do with the technology. That's got everything to do with your decision making. But if you do it multiple different ways, you build complexity, you build in cost, you reduce your clarity, and the effort to make sense of what actually is going on just goes up and up and up and up. So the outcome gets compromised.
So I'm liking your answer there, Paul. I'm also liking the second aspect you talked about generating that commitment amongst the ambassadors appointing ambassadors, and then getting them to really understand all the principles you're describing and committing to it. Because I think that's critical, isn't it? You can't communicate, you've mentioned you're a consultant, etc. No consultant can convince in the way which an internal person can to do and be the ambassador and driving that commitment. Now they need a team behind them to support them in what that commitment should be, but I like that. So I like that idea that you're trying to make it real as well amongst the business. So on a completely different topic, Michael, moving right forward to having HR technology and all that, then why do some people love their HR tech and why do other organizations hate it? What's that all about? Surely we've done.
I think the simple reality is, and we almost have to apply this to our own existence, right? It goes back to what's the change that you're making. I always tell a story, Tom, of when Apple brought out the watch. I was an Apple fan, completely seduced by it. I was like, I've got to have that. I need that. I bought it, wore it for a week, took it off, and never used it again. And the reason being is I haven't thought about what I was going to do with it. I didn't think about how it was going to fit into the rhythm of my life. I actually didn't think about the value that I wanted to get from it. So these points we have to apply in the same way as to when we're thinking about the capability we have in the workplace. So yeah, some people will say, this has made a big difference because it's anchored to the change, it's anchored to the outcomes, and it's actually really driving a rigor in the execution. What I see with those who say it hasn't made a difference, people don't use it, we're not getting adoption, is that they haven't done that. They haven't anchored it to the change. And listen, change management is an art form. Organizational change is really difficult. The true definition of change is discontentment with the current state. If you've got 10,000 people in your organization, you have to address that change with people who may not be discontented. So you don't automatically get adoption just because you bought a system. You get adoption because somebody thinks that their world will be better and you're helping me to achieve it and I understand it. So you can't ignore all of that, Tom, in this argument of why some like the tech and why some don't like the tech. You can't just look at it from a technological perspective. Be very interested to see what Paul's thoughts are.
I knew with you guys it would come down to change again. You're two long-standing technologists. You're going to blame the change side, which is... But we've all seen the stats. Programs which are successful, where they're happy, have driven that change successfully by one manner or another. So
yes,
and every program says it's hard. So, Paul, how do we kind of tackle that and start to solve why change is so hard and make it real?
So I don't think you can make change easy. I think it's always going to be hard. And I think if I go back to a couple of points I raised a little while ago, which is building and creating a safe and secure environment for people of all levels, be it HR leaders, be it process, HRIS SMEs, be it the business user as well. Let's not forget the business user is probably going to be the one has the largest impact. If we have an open environment where people can be honest about what they think, honest about what they're feeling, so these can be addressed. And I think this is absolutely key. Going back to making governance and bringing that alive, or what that means. If you have a meeting where you have half a dozen people, called HR leaders or business leaders, whatever. If you have a meeting with six people, and you tell them what's going to happen, but they don't actually feed back to you, there's no engagement, there's no two-way conversation, I can guarantee you're going to have limited impact, and you're making change a whole lot harder. If you facilitate that meeting and start to try and extract what they're thinking, what they're feeling, you can start to understand their point of view, and you can start to understand how this is actually going to impact them. And that's when you can start to really dig into, how is this going to help you, and how is this going to actually benefit you? And you can start to then get that connection and get that alignment. Once you have that, then again, that doesn't make it any easier. It's still going to be hard, but at least you've got something which you both have in common, and all have in common, and you can start then to support each other in terms of driving that change forward. I think that's the simplest way I can explain it. Everything else after that is a whole bunch of change methodology techniques which support that and drive it, and making sure that you maintain that alignment and progress it.
So really listening and understanding and giving the ability or the
yes.
forum to understand and listen. I mean, we talk a lot about how these technology changes bring improvements to people's lives and make things easier and all that stuff. And frankly, sometimes it's not true. Sometimes the technology is going to make certain aspects of our working day harder. And we need to, I think, and what you're describing, Paul, is be honest about that and bring that out, as well as the benefits and the improvements to people's lives. Because we often focus, I think, too much on the improvement and not acknowledge the truth, which is that some tasks become more onerous and other ones become easier. And I kind of like that. Now, one of the audience has correctly pointed out that behind that governance picture, it's important to make sure that the structures of design authority and then approval and all that stuff.
Totally agree.
Yeah. And so it's not just a question about having one governance group. I imagine it's a question about having structures behind it which kind of triage issues and then take them to the right governance questions.
Because it's ongoing. I mean, if you take one of the bedrocks of any organization is data as a currency has become so rich in recent times. You talk to organizations through COVID, having to do furlough schemes and changing pay and things like that. It was really difficult. So you have to have a design authority around data models, your structures, your spans and layers, how your processes will work. It is fundamental. Otherwise, you've got chaos, absolute chaos, and then things won't work. So wholly agree with that comment.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, Tom, and I think that so the point made there about design authority, etc., is key, and most people would look at that and say that's absolutely paramount for the implementation. But I'd also say that is paramount post-implementation,
yes,
and into your runtime and operational as well. And governance, unfortunately, it's not the it's discipline and it's rhythm, and that's what it does. If you maintain that discipline and rhythm, then you have a better chance of staying on track and giving yourself a platform to launch from.
And that's very interesting, because one of the other aspects which you mentioned earlier is that success factors, like the other cloud products, grows and changes over time.
Yes.
So those changes need to be understood. They need to go through an assessment process as to which ones we want to deploy and how. So when we're not talking about a point-to-point journey anymore. We're
No.
talking about a point to a start point, and then that being continuous. And I think that's fascinating. So, guys, you've said a lot of stuff, a lot of really useful stuff. But I, like the rest of the audience, have got a piece of paper in front of us and want to write down what are the 2 or 3 things from both of you which are top tips for a successful program. So make it pithy, guys, because we've only got our pieces of the paper aren't that big. But please tell us. Firstly, you, Michael, what are your top 2 or 3 tips to driving real success out of SAP and SuccessFactors?
I had 8, didn't I, Tom? And you were very clear with me. You said you've got to get that down to 2. So I did. I did try. So I think we covered a little bit of the ground earlier. But the first one is build your case for change and socialize it across your business, because you cannot assume anymore that your organization is where you are. They may not be. So you need to socialize it, get other people on board, and get that groundswell. I think securing that support for the change is huge, because you're not just asking for money, you're asking for support to change the organization. That's number one.
Yeah.
I think we talked about change management. So I think for me, get your communication strategy working early, very early, and really think about what those key messages are as you go along, because you want to take the organization with you. The third one then for me is about your future ways of working and operating model. It is often missed. If you're making this change to improve how you execute, to improve, how you run your organization, your operating model won't be the same. If it is, then something's gone wrong, because you should be changing the shape of how work is done, the role of the leader, the individual contributor, the shape of HR. It will be different, right? It will be different. And then the last one is, if you're building a roadmap, because there's multiple pieces of capability required, make sure it's an optimal roadmap. I think it goes back to the point we were making with Paul at the beginning about your prioritization and focusing on the critical processes. So build a roadmap that optimizes that. And so often we've seen that hasn't happened.
Michael, fascinating. 20 years plus working in technology, and none of your top tips are even talking about technology. They are all saying it's not about the technology. It's about the way you deploy it and understand it in your business and bring people along with you. That's fascinating. We are recording this, and brilliant. Paul, what are your top tips for success?
Yeah. So I mean, I've got like a list, but I'm just going to give you 2. So I think it's absolutely key that in terms of your thought process and your mindset going into your transformation, technology is not the silver bullet. It is the enabler for your ways of working and your transformation. So therefore, make sure your mindset is thinking around how do we implement the process and ways of working primarily and fundamentally before we even start talking about technology. And quite frankly, the way the technology is set up now, where it is adopt as opposed to adapt, you are forced or you're pushed into the direction of actually looking at how your business works and how you want it to work, because you don't have that flexibility or the ability to customize. So I think absolutely, technology is not the silver bullet. Make sure you look outside practices, processes, and that holistic view. So what happens off system, on system, etc. So that's the first point. Second point, absolutely get started early and start to understand who are the key stakeholders that you need to connect with. You need to understand the landscape in the business, whether there is, whether there is the cohesion in the leadership, whether there is a global mindset within the organization, and is there an environment and a forum for open and honest dialogue. I think that is absolutely key, because one thing I did want to point out earlier, didn't get a chance though, is that it's not only about talking and alignment across what we're going to do with the technology, what we're going to do with the transformation, etc. Having these open conversations actually highlights potential dissonance within the actual organization as well, the way the business operates. One part of the business might be thinking 5 rating scale, another part might be thinking 3 rating scale, et cetera, et cetera. And you need to have that conversation early, because that takes time. It really does. It takes a lot of time to get people over the line and get to a common ground where you can then launch into the technology space. So those are my 2 tips. I have more, but I'll leave them for later on.
Love it. Thank you very much, guys. As the audience, but Michael's pointing out, it's never been about technology. It's always been about getting these things right. But I think through today, I'm going right to the strength of SuccessFactors and SAP is that one unified experience and its innovation. What you guys are saying is you better be ready for that one unified experience and approach to making that work in the business. Otherwise, you're just not going to get that from trying to take out the box. So, guys, thank you very much. Very unified and one message as well. And I'd like to thank everyone else for joining us today. I think these guys have really given me some really exciting insights into where SAP is going, and also reminding us all that it's about getting that business ready and doing that. So thank you, Michael, for joining us. Great to see you this morning.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. And thank you, everybody else, for joining us this morning. I hope that it was as useful for you guys as it was for me. So it's easy.